Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I'm Sarah from The Upcoming, and congratulations on this really wonderful, if hard to watch at times, film. So maybe for people who don't know anything about Body of Water, can you just give a brief introduction? What can people expect if they're going to watch this film?
Sure. Body of Water is a drama about a character called Stephanie who's just coming out of inpatient treatment for anorexia, and she's returning home to see her family, who she's become somewhat estranged from, including her daughter Pearl and her mother. So it sort of follows the period after she leaves the clinic and in the run up to her mother's wedding.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's a sensitive subject, if not very taboo in some respects. Yet it is something that affects so many people, particularly women, whether that's a full-blown eating disorder or just an unhealthy relationship with food. I know from people around me in my personal life that it's something that's way more widespread than perhaps people give it credit for. So what was it that motivated you to want to make this film about this topic? And what was where did you take your inspiration from? I understand you had some personal experience with it as well.
I've always had like you said, I've always had a fairly complicated relationship with food. And, actually I was pretty much all right until my early 20s. But then I was around 23 and I was living in Shanghai. I know a few things changed in my personal life. I broke up with a long-term boyfriend, and my parents decided to get divorced, and my grandmother died and things like that. So quite a lot of things happened at once, and I was living alone, and I just got really, really out of control. Well, far too much in control of my eating, and I did become anorexic for, I would say, probably about a year. My periods stopped. I was really underweight. I was really obsessed with calories and, running and all the sort of classic stuff. But, I wasn't in a position where anyone would really identify it for me, or I was probably not even at what the NHS would define as a low enough weight to go into the kind of clinic treatment like Stephanie's character does. So after that period, I kind of, it was honestly a decade of really screwed up attitude to food. And then it kind of went into starving and binging and, but also what I found really troubling about my eating behaviors was how lonely I got with it and how much it affected my desire to be sociable. It becomes a really big thing if you're oh, I don't want to go to a restaurant because I don't know what's on the menu and how I'm going to navigate that, and all this anxiety that goes along with it. It's really troubling, and there's so much of it. And I think it's like you said, it's really common. And a lot of my friends had been through really one friend in particular had really bad bulimia, really, and it had been she said it was actually worse for her. She'd had anorexia as well, but the bulimia she found more difficult to overcome. But the thing about food and any kind of troubling behaviors around food is that, with a drug or alcohol addiction, I think it's to a degree, arguably somewhat easier to cut that out of your life, because you can sort of say, okay, I'm not going to have alcohol in my house, or I'm not going to associate with that group of friends that I used to go drinking with or did drugs with or whatever. You can't get away from food. So it's really a process of unpicking and unlearning those behaviors and rebuilding yourself. And if you can't do that on your own, the treatment actually is pretty limited in the UK as well, unless you can afford to go to a private clinic or you get referred. So a lot of people suffer with this stuff for a really long time, and it can go undetected and it can go missed. And it's women of, and the narrative I think in films also is that it tends to be teenage girls. If you see eating disorders at all, it's really young women. They're usually white. They're usually from really middle class backgrounds. And so I was like, well, that's obviously bullshit. But I was interested in a character also who was a mother, because, mothers are supposed to be nurturers. They're not also, culturally, they're not supposed to have this kind of problem. And we all know that that's not true. So yeah, that was the sort of starting point for creating Stephanie. But also it was important to make her like successful and kind of cool. Like she's stylish, she's got a identity, and she has had a career that, you know, is hinted at as a war photographer that's really impressive. I was kind of drawn to that because I had read quite a lot about war photographers who'd in a sense struggled when they'd left the like extreme war zones and situations like that. They'd sort of struggled with to go back to normality. So I find that a lot of them kind of would descend into have historically descended into kind of addictive behaviors. So for me it was like, okay, well, this is Stephanie's like some sort of addictive behavior. So yeah, and then it went from there. And obviously I did a lot of character development with Shan, the actress, when she came on board, and that was super helpful in ironing out any kind of holes or whatever. Oh my goodness, it's really crashing down with rain here.
Oh gosh.
I don't know if you can hear it, but so sorry, I'm rambling. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good point to pick up on as well, is working with Shan Brooks. I mean, she's absolutely incredible as this central character, but it's a very, very intense character to play.
Yeah.
So how did you cast her, and you know, how did you work with her to kind of make sure you tread that, you know, great line between exploring her character and then also bringing out kind of the really everyday struggles of this disease? You know, even just the moment in the supermarket, for example, you know, those little details I think are really important to showing just how challenging it can be.
Yeah. Well, I met I sort of became aware of Shan very early on in the casting process. We were looking around at, you know, casting Stephanie first because, you know, the chemistry had to be right with her for the other characters, kind of thing. So and Aisha Bywaters, who is our casting director, very early on said, I think Shan Brooke is terrific. She is really talented, and she's really committed, and she's just also a really lovely person to work with, which, you know, does make a difference. So I did see a few actresses, but very, you know, pretty much immediately I saw Shan, I was like, oh yeah, she's great. And we just got on as well. Like, she understood what I was trying to achieve. She had, you know, motivations for making it. She'd never had any kind of eating issue herself, but I think, you know, like we all know people that have had problems with this stuff. But also she was just really committed to like doing all the work that involved, i.e. all the sort of training and sort of putting herself in that position, which is a big ask for any actor. And I really, you know, she really made the film what it is. So yeah, but in terms of the moments in the film, what was always challenging about this is the fact that, you know, how do you dramatize food and eating when it's something that we all do every day? Like, how, you know, it's kind of difficult to make that interesting, or it's challenging, right, to make that dramatic, especially if it's someone on their own. But I kind of really early on thought, I want to do this thing where there's quite a lot of repetition in the film, because that's what it's like as well. Like anorexia and OCD are very closely linked. They come from similar part of the brain and similar thinking patterns. And anorexics often have OCD around food because that's just, they will eat certain things and do things at certain times and all that. So, you know, as the film, we obviously have like three sections where she's eating alone that sort of really highlight like her journey. And those were kind of in the film really early on. But then the scene in the supermarket also came out of this sort of, how do you show the anxiety that people feel when they are struggling with this stuff, and then they have to go to do something as mundane as go to the supermarket and buy stuff for a party. I mean, you know, but it's like that thing becomes like this almost insurmountable challenge in the mind of someone with anorexia. So I'm really proud of that scene, actually. I think it works really well at like you know, highlighting the triggers, because it's the diet, you know, the diet thing she hears and sees on TV, is what kind of makes her spiral. But it's also those moments, like there's those moments that we just, if you don't have this sort of issue, you're just completely unaware of. But for an anorexic person, they might be really triggering. And I think that I'm hoping that does something to highlight this stuff to people that might not really understand, you know, have seen that or experienced it themselves.
And I think you bring that out as well with her daughter, and kind of realizing how it can be these small moments actually trigger a problem. Like she's going on a diet, you know, with her friends, and then the nurse, you know, asks, "Oh, are you using apps?"
Yeah.
And I know that's like a big issue that's coming up now, is how technology and websites, you know, Stephanie herself is going on those websites and uploading pictures.
Yeah.
So kind of how something that's an existing issue, but it's actually being exacerbated by the technology that's now available, allowing people to kind of, you know, have, you know, an app that's going to somehow support them, or a website giving advice. So that's something that was also important for you to bring out.
Yeah, it was something I think, because when I really was in the real depths of the really obsessive kind of anorexia phase, there wasn't so much, you know, internet as there is now. So I don't think it was really such a thing that I thought about doing. But certainly when I did a lot of research for the film. I talked to a lot of people. I talked to a lot of therapists. And I talked to a lot of people that had overcome anorexia. And yeah, this stuff is out there. It's really toxic, but it's really, it is a community that offers solace to people when they are feeling like nobody else understands them, or they feel lonely, which is exactly, you know, the point that Stephanie gets to in the film. And you can understand that someone might, you know, if they feel like they've got nowhere else to go, well, you know, here are people who are going to congratulate them on how they look and tell them they're beautiful. That's quite seductive. So yeah, it's a really I find that moment quite harrowing in the film when she does that, because you sort of know that that's just because of loneliness. Again, which is my overriding thing about eating disorders, is that they're terribly lonely.
And of course, although the main topic is seeing her trying to recover from this problem, it's also as much about the relationship between these three generations of women, and, you know, seeing glimpses of their lives, of things that are about their relationship on its own, but also how it's been impacted by Stephanie's problem. So was that something you wanted to achieve as well, this very female focus, but also kind of this multi-generational perspective on women's lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we need more films that are focused on women. They're so, you know, you know, I don't want to sound like a a misandrist or whatever it's called, a man hater. But I just do feel that, you know, we have been saturated culturally with narratives about men and how complex they are and how they're allowed to be fucked up but then redeemed. So you know, obviously the tide is changing and has been for a little while now. But I think initially in early stages of the script, it wasn't just female central characters, but as the story developed, you know, it just became clear that was the most, you know, the real nugget of like what was really interesting, is how this one thing, like you know, sheds a light on all of this complexity between these three characters. And I think you know, women are like complicated, you know, women's relationships with each other are complicated. My relationship with my mum is complicated. There's a lot to draw on there. And yeah, I kind of find that stuff endlessly fascinating. So yeah, I think it really works well, because you just see how her mother is kind of at her wit's end, even at the start of the film. And then her daughter is just sort of really pissed at her for not being there. And then you can kind of understand everyone's perspective. And I think that's sort of how life is usually. There's not usually a really, you know, there's not really a goodie and a baddie. It's just sort of, you know, we have these problems and that, you know, they're difficult to kind of get out of. But that's the tapestry that I think is quite compelling in this story.
And what do you hope the impact of your film to be? Because it's, you know, it's beautifully made, and there's lots to watch and enjoy watching, but it's also sometimes, you know, quite difficult to watch her struggle, but in an important way, perhaps, by exposing people to, you know, the reality of living through a disease like this. So what do you hope that people will take away from seeing the film?
I think I just want to, I suppose my main hope is that people will look twice at someone that they might be thinking, oh, you know, something about them is not quite right, but they're my granny, you know, they're all right, they must be all right, you know, or they're my uncle, or, you know, to sort of try and look at these things differently, and to just sort of take better care of each other. But I know that's a very big blustery thing to say, but it is about, you know, collectively you know, trying to come to an understanding that it's not about, well, why don't you just eat a burger, which is a sort of common, you know, why can't you just have a sandwich, or why can't you just have a piece of cake? You know, no, it's not like that. It's a really complicated thing, but what's going to get someone through it is like the support of family and friends. And but sometimes at the other side, there are some people that do just don't want to get better. And this is a vicious disease, and it is, I believe I'm right in saying it's the psychiatric disorder with the highest suicide level of suicide rate amongst, or mortality rate, sorry. So that's a lot, and it's not about vanity, it's not about being thin and pretty, it's about so much more than that. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of show the reality of living with it, really. And I hope that in some way can you know, I guess just exposing that hopefully will lead to some positive ramifications in real life. That's all you can hope for with this sort of stuff. But it's not a big popcorn movie, but I hope that it does make it, you know, make a difference in a sense.
And just quickly to come to the making of the film, because it's your debut feature. You know, moved from shorts to feature films with this microwave program, I understand, from Film London, you know. So what was it like kind of working towards your first feature film and having to work with, you know, such a tiny budget, but then make such an incredible film out of it? How was that process for you?
Thank you. I'm not going to say it wasn't like linear and like, oh yeah, you know, you've commissioned your film and yeah, let's go shoot it in a couple of months. Okay, yeah. You know, it was like, there was a lot of grind with the scripts. I think I always thought this will definitely work on a low budget because it is a lot of one person in a room, like doing stuff. Admittedly, I didn't realize how complex it is to work with food at that level. In terms of retakes and continuity, because it's actually quite complicated, it turns out. But so after I came off the shoot, I was like, I never want to make a film with food in it again, because just so much pain goes into, you know, dressing the food and all of this stuff. But anyway, but Microwave, you know, it's an initiative run by Film London. It's been going for a while now, and yeah, they were wonderful to work with. They were really supportive, and I think the really cool thing about the whole way the film happened is that because the budget was pretty low, they were like, well, you know what, you can take a risk with this stuff. Just you know, you can go. I think it's quite freeing because you're like, I can go quite kind of essentially experimental or a bit more art house with this, because it's never going to be like, you know, in the, you know, like a Bond film, you know, it's never going to be competing with that kind of film. So in a sense, that's quite liberating. And you know, a lot of creative people say, you know, sometimes restrictions can be liberating, and I think it was definitely the case here. But it did sort of, you know, it does put a lot of pressure on production, because, you know, you have less time to do things, and actors have less time on camera and all of that, you know, all of that stuff. But I really did. I wouldn't imagine making another debut film. It is a very personal film, and it's probably the most personal film I ever made, because that tends to be the way it goes. But I'm really proud of it. So I'm hoping that it's you know, I hope it also makes people think, I guess.
And finally, just quickly,
sound too trite. Yeah.
How does it feel having to put a film out in, you know, with the pandemic going on, you know, all this going on with cinemas? Does that feel, how do you feel about the landscape for cinema at the moment? But perhaps there's also something to be said for some of the things this film touches on actually having even more relevance now, like when you talk about loneliness, and I don't know how people have coped with lockdown, with eating, and, you know, perhaps if you have an existing problem that might have been exacerbated by living through lockdown. So, you know, it could be that it even has more relevance in some ways.
I know, that's so interesting you said that, because I was just literally, I was talking to someone before this, and that just occurred to me, like, oh, I really, because I haven't watched the film since February when we had the premiere in Glasgow, and I want to kind of go back and put on with like COVID goggles, because I realized that so much, and I've read about, like, there's been quite a lot of articles about how people with eating disorders have been struggling over lockdown, because, you know, they haven't been able to exercise perhaps the way they would, or they haven't had, when you're trying to recover from this stuff, you know, routine is really important. And it is actually to a lot of, you know, people with a lot of sort of cognitive variations, like, you know, people with Asperger's and stuff like that, like routine, you know, loss of routine can be very upsetting. So yeah, I think in that sense, Body of Water will definitely speak to people. And I think, but in terms of the cinema release, we were a little bit unsure for a while as to whether it would actually end up in cinemas, just because of, you know, things being closed down for a while, or things getting pushed back. And a number of my friends were releasing films just at the start of lockdown that, you know, it was really tough on them because no one went. And you know, it's a difficult industry to be in anyway. So I think it's sort of slightly finding its feet again now. Well, in the independent film sector is, but obviously the Cineworld news and the Picture House news is really tragic. And you know, I feel really sad for those companies. I feel really sad for the employees, and you know, and it's what the really difficult thing is that it's taken, you know, one or two massive films to do this to an entire industry, but that shows that there is something rotten in it. And I'm hoping that on the flip side, on the other side of this, that we will be nurturing smaller films again. They will get a bit more of a voice and a space, because you know, they'll be the things that be able to sustain. So, you know, it's such a difficult time for the arts in general right now. But I think we've got a cinema release coming on 16th of October, and I think it's not, you know, it's across the UK, some of my favorite independent cinemas, and I do think that's, you know, they've been really carefully selected, because they'll you know, they'll find there will be an audience to go to them there. But that to me is what I think, you know, that suits the film. And we're having it obviously simultaneous on demand release. So I feel like, you know, I feel like I'm in a good place for, you know, for where this could have gone for COVID year. I feel like this is turning out okay. So I'm just looking forward to seeing how everyone responds to it, really.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think I'm out of time, but thank you so much for sharing all that with me. And
thank you. Sorry. I hope it was okay.
No, it's brilliant. Thank you so much, and yeah, best of luck with the release and with your next projects.
Thank you so much.